to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this weekend edition of the program. It is Global Insight on your Pan-African television for you, Media Africa. Today, we are looking at the African Union, Africa's #1 institution, but drawing particular attention on the African Union Commission in pending elections billed for February 2025. The elections will be a decisive moment, and the African Union Commission is actually the heart of the African Union. So we will dive into an intriguing topic that affects the future of Africa and its people. The African Union stakes of the African Union Commission top job amid calls for reforms as we gear up for the elections of the African Union Commission chair in February 2025. Global Insights does the reflects on the transformative agenda of the African Union and the pressing challenges that accompany it. The current chairperson, Musa Faki Mahamat, has served the organization since 2017, now with strong candidates from East Africa vying for this pivotal position. We are actually tasked with exploring how the upcoming leadership change could influence not just the African Union reforms, but Africa's standing on the global stage. To note, the four candidates or political African politicians contesting the position of the African Union Commission include Djiboutian Mahamoud Ali Yusuf, Kenyan Raila Odinga, and Mauritanian Anil Goyan, and the Malagasy Richard Randramandrato. And of course, campaigns are ongoing already. The outcomes of these polls will determine the next line of action to be adopted by the African Union stakeholders, especially in line with policy implementation and practical reforms in a more complex society. The African Union, it should be noted, plays a crucial role in championing peace, security, and sustainable development across Africa, with calls for significant reforms echoing throughout international corridors. The new leadership will face the critical task of ensuring the AU remains relevant and effective in addressing contemporary challenges faced by the African continent. First, with an esteemed panel of experts, we seek to share insight on the internal and external factors surrounding the African Union, its reform process, and what it takes for the next chairperson of the African Union Commission to achieve continental objectives aligned with Africa's Agenda 2063. Stay tuned. This is Global Insight. Of course, it is time for us to build the Africa we want. The mantra embedded in Africa's Agenda 2063. I must welcome again, ladies and gentlemen. And as already underlined in the preamble, we are looking at the impending elections of the African Union Commission. And of course, coming at a time where the calls for AU reforms have intensified across various spheres in Africa. So what are the stakes? Of course, what should we expect from these four candidates? The cap is on East Africa this time around, and who will be the winner? We'll have, of course, the agenda of the African continent, especially at the global level, and there will be replacing Charles Musa Faki Mahamat, who has been at the helm of the African Union Commission since the year 2017. Of course, without much ado, we're going to uncover the panel this moment. that will give us insight onto what expectations we have regarding the candidates vying for this very important position, the African Union Commission. And with delight, I will take us now to Algeria to welcome Professor LAEED ZAGHLAMI, Algiers University, Faculty of Information and Communication. Hello to you, Professor LAEED, and welcome to today's edition of the program.
Good afternoon to you, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you, Clark, for having me on the program again, and to your guest and panel, David and Elias, my regard. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving us your time this day, Professor LAEED, to the United States of America. Let's welcome Professor David MONDA, international relations expert, public policy analyst, of course, who hails from the East African nation of Kenya. Welcome, Professor MONDA.
Thank you for having me.
Looking forward to having a fruitful conversation with you, of course. Kenya's Raila Odinga is contesting this very important position of the African Union Commission. We stay in the United States of America with Dr. Eddie Eric, Program Officer at the Solidarity Center from Côte d'Ivoire. Hello to you, Dr. Eddie, and welcome to today's Global Insight. While waiting for Dr. Eddie Eric to join us, let's also acknowledge Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, if he's already there, Director of Center for Africa Development of Cameroon nationality. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a discursive program, and just to note that we'll be broadcasting live on YouTube and Facebook, so you can always keep your comments pertaining at subject matter, which is, I think, very pivotal for the African continent in present society. We're going to dive straight away. Let me start off with you, Professor MONDA. I would love us to have an overview of our topic for today. We are focusing particularly on the impending elections of the African Union Commission Chair billed for February 2025. But I would like us, of course, to have an overview of the subject matter, especially as calls have intensified for practical reforms to meet the changing times.
Yes, so thank you very much again for having me. I think this race is very important because the holder of the African Union Commission Chair will have a very instrumental role, not only in overseeing the Commission, but also in reforming the Commission. As we know, the AU came in after the change from the Organization of African Unity into the African Union because of this desire to more fully integrate the continent, to more fully integrate the sovereignties of the 55 different parts of the continent in terms of nation states, but also more effectively to deal with economic, security, political, environmental, and cultural challenges that face the continent. So I think it's a very critical juncture in terms of the future of the African Union, and more specifically around how to change the African Union Commission into an African Union authority. In other words, to give it more teeth and more power away from the heads of state meeting, and to provide for the Secretariat with a lot more power. But I think, secondly, also reforming the institution around its funding, and also around how to ensure that the regional economic communities are able to handle the security challenges in their different areas. As we know, for example, in Sudan, in northeastern Africa. We have this continuing war. We have the problems in the DRC, in Central Africa. The AU's not done an effective role of bringing those into control. We have problems in the Sahel with, external actors and collapse of the state and military governments. So there's a whole range, a whole plethora of challenges, not only political, economic, but also environmental around what the new chair of the Africa Union Commission, what they will have to face.
Absolutely, which is very imperative, Professor MONDA, noting that the new chair will have to put into consideration the changing times, a moment of shifting alliances. Is it time for the AU to revisit its preamble, of course, to go back to the drawing board and see what has to be updated to meet, of course, the changing times? To note that, ladies and gentlemen, the objective of this program today is to explore the stakes surrounding the upcoming African Union Commission chair election and its implication on continental reforms. And so in the same perspective, we want to have an opening overview from Professor LAEED on a subject matter today. Of course, you have the mic, Professor LAEED.
Thank you very much, Clarice. Of course, what we need right now, African Union should assess its strength as well as its weakness. What has been achieved for 2 mandates of Fatia Mahamat. And of course, we are not here to blame here for this or that. We are here to make an objective and fair assessment of what were his key achievements. And of course, we have to speak also about the failure. It's hard it's right to say, it's worth to say that African Union has not been very efficient. This is my view as far as its impact or its role or its contribution in the world affairs. I would say for many years, African Union has been lagging behind. Instead of taking the lead, they have always been invited as subcontracting for other powers. And frankly, when I see these different summits, multilateral summits between Africa and Japan, Africa and United Nations, European Union, Africa and South Korea, Africa and Turkish and so forth, I feel like this is Africa is asking for help, is begging for us. This image should be removed. Africa Union should speak on equal base with blocks, not with only countries. We cannot bring 55 leaders and bring them to meet with one country. This is completely ridiculous. And I am utterly opposed to this kind of situation. It's like people are making a tourism visit, and of course then they are mistreated. I remembered what the reaction of the president of William Ruto of Kenya when he said we were taken in the bus like kids. Now this is not should be this way of dealing should be completely removed. Africa has time has come that they stand up on their own feet and discuss and talk and speak on equal base with all countries and particularly with all blocs. We cannot accept this bringing the whole continent, 55 people, 55 countries coming to speak one with one. This is completely wrong. More than that, African, if we talk about what is happening now in the African Union in terms of achievement, still we are facing so many problems, whether it's in the case in Libya right now, in Western Sahara, in the Sahel, in Congo, and so forth. So many problems, and we have foreign military intervention. Why don't we activate the standby of African force? So I don't know if there is really a political will from the leader of countries to really to impose their their views over African issues. African problems should be solved by the African leaders themselves.
Okay. Thank you so much for the introductory statement into our topic for this, Professor LAEED. And of course, still under the contextual background of our topic for this day, Professor MONDA, let me come back to you while we highlight some of the perspective on the importance of the African Union Commission leadership in driving practical reforms, given that the AUC stands practically or largely as the heart of the AU.
Yes, this is very true. The Commission stands at the heart of the AU, you know, we will talk a lot about the challenges of the African Union, but I think there've also been some significant positives, and maybe I'll highlight, you know, a few. I think the continent has been very vocal when you think about the use of multilateral institutions, specifically around driving the agenda of the continent on climate change. We had a very good coalescing of all heads of states, foreign ministers in Nairobi last year, around the Nairobi Declaration on pushing the global, on pushing the Western nations, the developed nations, China, to do more around global climate change. And, you know, the African voice in terms of climate change and the need for Africa to be provided with the technological support, and also for the more developed nations, or the developed nations to pay for climate change, I think was a significant was a significant milestone. Yeah. We saw the situation in Senegal, where we recently had a very successful election. Although there were challenges around, the former president wanting to remain in power, but we saw that the people's voice, come through in terms of that. But I also think in terms of the Ukraine Russia divide, the West has not been as successful in terms of dividing the continent on that issue. Most African countries have opted to either abstain, usually to abstain from taking sides, to either support the United States and the Western allies or Russia. And I think that's important, particularly for the continent, with a lot of weaker nation states that are on the periphery of the international system, to focus more on their core national interests. So I think those are a range of, some of the successes. But as we mentioned, there's still major challenges. Specifically, I'll highlight the funding of the African Union. We still rely significantly on funding from abroad for the African Union, which is highly problematic. The issue of heads of state not being jealous of their sovereignty, not wanting to pool their common sovereignties together to speak with one voice, I think is another problem. So, for example, President of Kenya wants to act independent from President of Cameroon. President of Cameroon wants to act independent from President of Nigeria. So you have all these different divisions. That's still a big problem, particularly, as you've mentioned, when we're focusing on the African Union Commission. The head of the commission has to try and get all these 55 different heads of states to work together. And a lot of them do not want to give up power. So I think that's another major challenge. I think that the fourth one will also be, how do you reform the African Union Commission to become an African Union authority? So give it more teeth. So, for example, when you think about the Africa peer review mechanism, right? Sure. What are some of the consequences for countries falling behind the expectations of the peer review mechanism. In terms of democratic backsliding, what do we do with countries in the Sahel, for example, where military governments topple democratically elected civilian regimes and refuse to get out of power? I think there's been a paralysis in terms of ECOWAS, in terms of how to deal with the democratic deconsolidation and this proliferation of military coup d'etat in the Sahel belt. Okay. ECOWAS had previously been very successful with intervening in terms of coup d'etat in West Africa. We saw the case of Gambia with Yahya Jammeh, but it seems that they've not been able to decisively deal with this new wave of authoritarians and military rulers that have taken power illegitimately. So I think there's there's a basket of positives, but there's also a bigger basket of challenges, and I'm excited to unpack that more with you today.
Absolutely, Professor MONDA, unpacking the challenges and, of course, understanding the complexities and what the impending or the incoming AUC chair will have to handle as far as the continent is concerned. Let's welcome Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, of course, with this question. Dr. ENOAKU, we are looking at the African Union Commission elections which are built for February 2025, and looking at the challenges or the scope for the incoming or upcoming AUC Commission. Now it is coming at a time of, great diplomatic fluid across the African continent. And what prospects for the upcoming leader in trying to resolve some of these diplomatic fluid in order to cement the African Union that will be more instrumental in driving the right trajectory for the Africa we want? Welcome.
Thank you, Clarice, and thank you to all the viewers. I want to begin by saying that when you send the list of potential candidates that we have that are coming up, it sends shockwaves down my spine. Say that if these are the potential candidates that we're having right now, I'm very sorry to disappoint you that I'm starting on a very negative note. The Africa that we are expecting in this dispensation is an Africa that is going to deal with military challenges all over the world. The Africa that we are expecting in this dispensation is the Africa that's going to carry out the Agenda 2063. That's a gigantic agenda that you need radical performances, radical leaders, people with vision. The Africa that we are looking forward to is an Africa that's going to tackle the challenge of malnutrition and lack of food sufficiency on the continent of Africa, a continent that have more than 30% of arable land, that you don't need any fertilizer. You can still go ahead and produce substantial food that can feed the rest of the continent. We're looking at Africa that's having a challenge of education. We are talking about technology that is advancing at a rapid rate. We're talking of an Africa that is going to tackle the challenge of climate change. I heard my colleague just talked about it a while ago, but the way we talk about it is as if we are listening to the Western world to beg money from them in order to implement strategies that are going to be competitive with the rest of the world. The Africa that we're going to be looking about is an Africa that is going to be faced with enormous challenges. Sure. And if we think that we're going to take tired leaders who have no vision, leaders who have no idea of what's happening in the world, leaders who cannot stand toe to toe with the Western world, leaders who cannot articulate.
Unfortunately, we lost Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. Subsequently, he will be joining us or rejoining to better give highlights or insight on this very important topic. But before we continue, I will invite us to listen to one of the candidates contesting the position of the African Union Commission in the person of Raila Odinga, the very influential opposition and political leader in the East African nation of Kenya. Let's listen to a snippet of his, his address while unveiling officially his campaign and manifesto ahead of the February slated elections in that will hold in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
My plan is to work with you, Your Excellencies, and make the AU more people-centered and serve the interests of the vast voiceless majority of Africans. The African people should feel the AU in their lives. Excellencies, if elected chairman, I propose to utilize the transition period to critically analyze the existing proposals for reforms and building capacity of the AU Commission. The ultimate aim is to follow up on the implementation of the reports so far formulated.
Of course, that is Raila Odinga of Kenya, one of the contenders of the position of the African Union Commission. And we are looking at the possibility or the scope for these candidates as they seek to take over from Charles Musa Faki Mahamat, who has been at the helm now. So we are going to continue with you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, apologizing, of course, for the interruption. Okay, let me come back to you, Professor LAEED, while waiting for Dr. Elijah to tune in. We are looking at, of course, the candidacy of these, African politicians vying for the top job of the African Union Commission. In your perspective now, what are the key skills and competencies needed for the next AUC chair to effectively drive the implementation of African Union reforms and even chart a clear agenda for the African continent from the preamble that you and your colleagues just highlighted, opening the subject matter for today?
Without offending anyone, I'm just telling you right now, and this is my view, I found that the African Union leadership is weak and vulnerable. And I am saying that with the base of fact and how African Union is perceived, is treated worldwide. They are incapable because it's our problem. And the gentlemen, they said already they could not secure their own financing. How can you be independent if you are still begging European Union, USA, Japan, and so forth for help? No way, no one will help you unless they have to get in some kind of concession and, of course, on bargaining, on principle. That's why African Union leadership needs a strong, a charismatic person. Besides the academic knowledge and competency and language and geography and politics and international relations, the gentleman, the incumbent candidate should have the conviction and should have the charisma that he can impose. African leadership is so far weak, and therefore we have to impose our view. And of course, this is not only words, but on the ground, we should elect a person who is able to really impose African view and to speak out the minds to speak out the minds of African people in international arena. That's why I feel very sorry that, unfortunately, I noticed that the last couple of years and so, African Union went into some kind of bargaining and negotiation to secure their own budget, and this is completely wrong. And of course, they were at the mercy of European Union financing scheme, and it gives the European Union an opportunity to impose, to interfere, and to intervene in African internal affairs. So we have now for contender, as we said it already clearly. But I won't say who will be elected. But if we consider each candidate's country, we have one from Kenya, one from Mauritius, one from, of course, Comoros, and the other one from Djibouti. I think I'm not despising anyone, but these countries, Djibouti, Comoros, and Mauritius, on the political card, they are not so strong as the case of Kenya, and maybe and particularly Raila Odinga, the leader of opposition in Kenya, who couldn't get power in Kenya for so many times. I hope that he was not kicked out of domestic affairs in Kenya to get him rid of Kenyan domestics and send him to Addis Ababa. But frankly, I don't know. Neither all of people candidates don't know them. But I predict that they have to understand and to bear in mind they have a lot of huge challenge to impose at least African Union to be revisited and gain its dignity, its sovereignty, and financial independence. If we cannot secure that, again, we will succumb to another situation of vulnerability, concession, and so forth. So, to sum up, African Union needs a strong leader with charisma, with knowledge, enough knowledge in politics, speaks more than one language or two languages, and know very well the challenge that faces the continent.
Of course, and the goal is to have the agenda of the continent as a major priority. Just to note that when Raila Odinga was addressing the audience when unveiling his political agenda for the African Union Commission, he noted that it was high time Africa moves or takes this slogan, which are very, appealing to ensuring that leads to strategic implementation of reforms across the African continent. It's about the Africa we want. And now, coming back to you, Professor MONDA, let's try to analyze the past leaders who have been at the helm of the African Union Commission, and of course see what the stakes are for these incoming candidates that will maybe emerge victorious at the elections which are built for 2025. What leadership structure can they actually adopt?
I think that the new leader or whoever takes over the commission will really need to be a consensus builder. They will need to have very personal relationships or networks with a lot of African leaders. I think they will need to be able to bridge the traditional idiosyncratic, regional, linguistic, and political rivalries between and within African states. So to your question again, whoever is the next leader will need, for example, to bridge that gap between Francophone Africa and Anglophone Africa, which played out last time when we had Musa Faki run against Amina Mohamed, from Kenya, and Musa Faki from Chad. there's a huge divide there, and there seems to also be a similar divide coming up with the upcoming election, with a candidate from Djibouti, French-speaking Africa, and Raila Odinga from Anglophone Africa. Most of the countries that have endorsed Raila Odinga, apart from Algeria, that endorsed him, all of the rest are from Anglophone Africa.
Yeah.
So I think that's a challenge, the linguistic divide. I think the geographic divide, Madam Chair, is something we really need to seriously consider, because historically, the West has always divided Africa between the North Africa, and the South, meaning sub-Saharan Africa. The more broadly Arab-speaking North, and the more Christian slash the more Christian speaking South. So there's that traditional North-South divide. And why do I say that? Because we've not really come very forcefully around this question of Palestine. I think it's only South Africa which has really been very vocal around some of the atrocities of the right-wing Israeli government against the Palestinians, and some of the instabilities in the Middle East. And I think most African countries, or all African countries, as members of the Global South, and past AU declarations of granting the PLO observer status within the AU, of denying Israel observer status because of some of the atrocities in the Middle East. I think that geographic divide really needs to be bridged between the North Africa and the South, in terms of how Africa then speaks around these core global foreign policy questions, particularly, on the Middle East. And then I think the other challenge that you mentioned, I think that the new chairperson would really need to address is, the youth dividend.
Sure.
Over 60% of the continent's 1.2 billion people are youth below the age of 25. And these are, young people that feel frustrated, that feel marginalized, that feel unrepresented within their own countries, and within the priorities, for example, of NEPAD, New Partnership for Africa's Development, in terms of addressing their core concerns. And I think this is then exemplified when we see, a lot of our young people dying, trying to cross the Red Sea to get to Arabia to find better opportunities, or to cross the Mediterranean from North Africa. A lot of migrants from sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa, right, trying to get to Europe, and dying. A lot of these young people dying in large numbers. Yeah. I think that's also a huge question. But I think finally, the chair should also be thinking about questions of transparency and fairness in terms of global trade, and how that affects the continent, right? Africa we have less than 3% of the global trade, and this cannot continue. And simply because in a lot of cases, the structures of global trade and commerce are stacked against Africa developing, in terms of tariffs against African commodities that are exported to either Europe or the US, around the transfer of technology, but also around the investment that's brought on the continent, Madam Chair, right? This idea that a lot of the industries are still very extractive. We don't have technology being shared. We have the abuse of labor in many African countries with very exploitative corporate interests. So I think in terms of the linguistic question, the geographic divides, the policies on trade, I think these will be big areas that the new chair will really need to address.
Indeed, that is why we said the stakes are really high, and of course, is the scope actually available for this incoming chair to capitalize on, to meet, of course, the objectives which you just highlighted and which Professor LAEED highlighted earlier on. And still in the same perspective, coming back to you, Professor LAEED, I quite remember some time ago when Musa Faki Mahamat was actually addressing the trends across the global world, and particularly on Africa. He noted that multilateralism has greatly increased in the 21st century, and now Africa is cognizant of these, changing times, but also called on major stakeholders across the continent, especially political stakeholders, to capitalize on this multilateralism to increase Africa's standing or Africa's voice at the international level. Now, the question which we need to answer at this particular moment, Professor LAEED, is: do you think, even with the continent already aware of that the scope is high as far as multilateralism is concerned in Africa, do you think the available scope is already there for leaders to capitalize and redefine Africa's trajectory? And if no, what are some of those impediments and, of course, recommendations that needs to be taken practically to, salvage the situation?
Yes, you are completely, and you are right to affirm that. But my view is that for sure we have a multiplicity of multilateral relations between Africa and so many countries. But my point is good to have this, of course. Then, of course, you are upgrading the position of Africa worldwide. But I think the problem is not in the strategy. The problem is in the technicality. What I want to say by that, I don't want to see all 55 countries, their leader moving all together to, let's say, to Istanbul when it comes to relations between Turkey and the African Union, or to Japan and to Tokyo, as happened last time about TICAD and all this and diplomatic position. I think we should give African Union leadership enough power, and they should speak. They should speak on behalf of 55 countries. We have a strong leadership that I would give more impetus, more power, more responsibility to the leadership of African Union to speak on behalf of their members, and not to bring all together to Washington, to Paris, to Italy, and here and there. No, this is completely, unless the objective is not to promote the image, but to make tourism. And I'm sorry to say that. So but African Union, it's I would say the main representative of 55 countries, and they should be the only one who speak, who negotiate with countries, with the blocs and so forth. I don't want that to have all these big people, a big audience, mistreated in so many cases. And African Union should be present with its leadership, and maybe why not bring diplomats, not necessarily in the ranks of president of foreign minister. That should be clearly defined, because Western countries, if they are, whether Western countries or external countries like Japan, South Africa, South Korea, and Turkey, and so forth, when they meet all these people, for them it's an opportunity to engage in some kind of bilateral relation. Leave aside the bilateral relation, think about multilateral. African Union has the authority and the prevalence. That's what we should see. Afterwards, of course, and when we speak one voice, it is easy to reach a conclusive result. But coming all together in this, I would say, manner, which is not really acceptable, which is not coherent, which is not harmonious for Africa, this is bad image. That's why, and more than that, African Union now, it has to speak out, to impose its view in the world affairs, and of course from what is from the activities of many countries like the Group 10, which composed of Algeria, Sierra Leone, and so forth. They ask for at least two members, permanent membership in the United Nations Security Council. So that's exactly what we should speak for and look for and defend. And I don't understand why we are still keeping asking for help, asking for assistance instead of talking of partnership. We should now value the concept of partnership, of cooperation, and not of assistance. And that this word should be removed. And likewise, I would like to say that African Union has the right, because why? Has the right to impose its view on the water. Why? Because it's a rich country. It's a rich continent, I would say. We are richest country, a continent in the world, with over 1,300,000,000 of inhabitants. Then, of course, with a particular youth and so forth. So I think we should have self-confidence. This is the problem: is that African Union don't have their self-confidence, and they continue to rely on other and foreign aid. This is completely wrong. This is very negative perception. So that's what we should reverse. We should revisit the relation between African Union and the outside world.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about time Africa stands intentional about defining its position in relation to the outside world. And while talking about the stance of the African Union, Professor LAEED, I would love to stay with you one more time. Let's try to look at some sort of, we just identified that multilateralism is increasing across Africa. We see every nation carving sphere of influence across Africa. And we also see that while this is happening, there is still a lot of divergence across the African continent. The last AU summit in Addis Ababa, that was 2023, we actually noted that a bulk of the session actually was about discussing the contestation between countries. We saw the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Rwanda, and even Ethiopia, and Ethiopia, Somalia, and Egypt, and other contestations which are now across the continent. So how can, under the banner of the African Union Commission and the upcoming chairperson, redefine Africa's diplomacy that will, solve this internal strife to be able to capitalize on the sphere or the scope of multipolarity on the continent for its good, attaining Agenda 2063?
Yes. Okay, Clarice. What I would say, I think African Union in its organization and its structure, they have a different commission, and the main one is on Peace and Security Commission. Its business, its main business, is to maintain peace and security in the whole country. I think they have the structure, they have the policy, they have the philosophy. When we speak about security, we have the architecture, peace and security agenda, APSA, and we have also so many other instruments to impose. We have people, we have leader of this what we call wise man who can be. So we have to the mediation process. You don't have to take side with one against the other. This commission, and of course those in charge of this commission, they should work together to help people getting together. I'm not being chauvinistic. I remembered when we have the Algerian head of commission, whether it was Lamamra or the other one who came after Mr. Shirgi, they have done a great job to at least to establish peace and security in many parts of Africa. Why? Because they have been proning an impartial view when it comes to the situation, when it comes to the conflict between, as we said, Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda, when it comes to Ethiopia and of course Egypt and Sudan regarding the the dam construction and the reconstruction. So I think we have they have all the instruments. They have the policy. What is lacking is the willing and the responsibility of the leaders who are in charge of implementing this to get constructive approach and objective one, and not supporting one against the other. I am sorry to say there were so many cases, so many conflicts which were solved because of the special envoy of African Union in that part of Africa. And I am sorry, African Union has done nothing, and through the Commission of Peace and Security. Why didn't they activate the standby African force? Why did not? Why did they have to? Why have they let the French coming to Sahel 5,500 and other European forces? So we are lacking efficiency. We are lacking strength, and we don't activate, or maybe we are guided by external people who are dictated how to do, and that's why I think I am convinced that if Africans really are confident of their own potentiality, they could solve the problem. The last thing I want to say, if we speak about the case of Sahel, for instance, until now we have about 14 to 16 initiatives, which means we have 16 partners coming from all over the world. United Nations, African Union, of course. We have the Islamic Cooperation for Education, for Organization, Arab League. We have European Union. We have USA. We have so many other non-official entities coming in, and all of them are there not for the main reason of establishing peace, but for securing their own objective and interest. So time has come that Africa should unite behind strong leadership and stop the interference of foreign countries. Take the example of Western Sahara. Western Sahara, the case has been pending for 50 years exactly, and then some countries, take the example, and some countries sided with Morocco against the common sense, against the country which is member, against Western Sahara, which is a member of the Constitution Act of African Union 2002. So this is nonsensical. We should stick to values and to principles of African Union and of Pan-Africanism.
Indeed, putting the interest of Africa and Africans first. Professor Monda, I will appreciate it if you also comment on this aspect. Of course, we just to tell our viewers that we wouldn't want to focus on the personalities of just on the personalities of the candidates contesting this post, but we also want to identify the stakes which lie ahead as we move toward the election date. We have seen we are still on the internal divergence in the continent and how it is already a great setback. How intentional can this, impending leaders be at the helm of the African Union Commission, the Secretariat of the AU, in resolving these very strong diplomatic feuds which are tearing the continent, undermining its political independence or sovereignty in taking continental decisions?
I think that's an important question, and it's a very difficult question. And I think Africa has so many conflicts. Every conflict has its own unique context. So the previous guest was speaking to, we have the long-standing challenge of Western Sahara. the Polisario movement, in that region, and this tension between Morocco and Algeria around the question of Western Sahara, and the challenges around a plebiscite for the people of Western Sahara for their own self-determination, and how that will be dealt with. So I think that's one of very sticky areas, which Morocco seems to, recently have been successful in getting many members of the AU to support its stance on Western Sahara, including including recently in Kenya with the switch of the recognition from Western Sahara to Morocco in terms of diplomatic recognition. We also see on that very same issue, Morocco mending its fences with the AU. Because Morocco, stormed out of a lot of the AU structures because of its position on Western Sahara, the AU's position on Western Sahara. So that's a very difficult context, I think, for the next chairperson of the Africa Union Commission. But another context we can think about is in the situation in the DRC.
Absolutely.
Where, again, we have all these multiple regional and global players that have their hands into extraction of the rare minerals in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. So here we're thinking around, the gold, the silver, the coltan, the titanium, the manganese, these very rare minerals. And it becomes even more challenging because, countries like Rwanda have been backing proxies like the M23 in advancing their regional security and economic and political interests in the DRC. But the other challenge is that government in Kinshasa is too weak to fully assert its sovereignty over that region. And then we have the multiplicity of economies of violence that are being created within the Great Lakes region that make resolution of the problems in that area and in that context also very difficult. And I think the third and last example I'll give, in specifically to your question of some of the challenges for this this new leader and how they can deal with some of these regional rivalries and transnational rivalries. Sudan, very frankly, is faced with the serious threat of implosion. In other words, Darfur, the country is splitting into three different parts at this point. The central government in Khartoum has moved to Port Said. The rebels, the RSF rebels, continue to grow in strength. There seems to be an impasse in terms of the war between the two factions, and the war seems to continue forever. So Sudan, we're really at a precipice where you can have Sudan break up into three parts, with the Darfur region becoming its own independent country because the RSF and Hemedti has a lot of support in that area. The South Kordofan area breaking off. And then, General Burhan having his control over the Port Said area. So that's a real significant challenge. I think one other thing we must say is we have to also realize that the irony and the weakness of the African Union, because even within Ethiopia itself, there's a low-lying civil war with the Oromia in the south of Ethiopia. Yeah. We had the recent problems in Tigray. So even at the seat in Addis Ababa of the African Union, we have significant problems. And, I think it's fair for us to be honest and realistic about what the new chair of the African Union can do. I tend to see it more as continuity rather than change. And until Africa starts to develop strong economic institutions, strong political institutions, rather than strong men, I think these problems will continue for a long time to come.
And making it really problematic. Will it be a continuation or will it be a drastic change for the betterment of the entire continent? Just to remind you, ladies and gentlemen, if you are just tuning in, you're on to Global Insight on For You Media Africa. And today, the African Union, Africa's #1 institutional bloc, is on the table while we are particularizing on the impending African Union Commission elections that will see a successor of Charles Musa Faki Mahamat come in. But now, what changes do we expect? What are the stakes for this new coming leader? And of course, is the scope, especially political scope, available for these candidates to actually harness for the betterment of the continent Africa? And it is here that we are going to go deeply again to understanding the challenges of what awaits these candidates. I will stay with you, Professor MONDA. You know, Raila Odinga of Kenya is one of the candidates vying this very strategic position in Africa. While talking earlier on, Professor LAEED was, questioning the feasibility of the candidature of Raila Odinga, taking examples from his internal maneuver in the political life of Kenya. Now, let's, being a citizen from Kenya and a great analyst, what can we say are the prospects for Raila Odinga in leading at the continental level? Of course, the political race is living internally from Kenya to broaden the African continent.
So this is an interesting question you ask, because a lot of this politicking, the voting on the new chair, it's a lot of politics and a lot of diplomatic wheeling and dealing. So if we look back at the last elections for the last chair of the the AU Commission, Amina Mohamed was very much ahead at the initial round of voting. When you had the Senegalese candidate, you had Musa Faki and Amina Mohamed. She was well ahead. But the Chadian candidate, Musa Faki, was very adroit and skilled in terms of wheeling and dealing, and getting some consensus around his candidature. So even though Amina Mohamed had done more as a foreign minister in terms of leading major international diplomatic organizations, Musa Faki was more hands-on and practical and able to wheel and deal and to bring consensus around his candidature, and to deny Amina Mohamed the seat, particularly when you looked at the results of the voting, where a lot of countries actually abstained from voting for Amina Mohamed, and that led to Musa Faki actually getting a majority of the votes in the final round. So I used the last elections to reflect then on these elections.
Sure.
Even though it might appear that Raila Odinga is at the forefront of winning, or at the cusp of winning, this seat, the significant and troubling clouds for him, given the fact that it seems that a lot of his support is really based around, Anglophone Africa.
Sure.
South Africa and Nigeria, as the two superpowers, on the continent, have provided support for him. So there will definitely be a backlash from a lot of the countries, non-English speaking countries, that might feel that the seat should actually remain with a francophone speaking country, and that will be something to look at.
Yeah.
But I think in conclusion, I think I might also say the AU Executive Council is on record as saying that regionally, because previous seats have been held by Western, Central, and Southern African regions. Previous chairs have come from both regions. So the AU Executive Council is actually has been of the opinion that it's now Eastern Africa's turn, because all the other regions have had a chair. That is now Eastern Africa's turn to have a chair. It's only fair that that every region of the continent has has a chance to provide a chair for the AU. So it'll be interesting to see going forward how that how that plays out. But I think as of today, as we speak, I think Raila Odinga is definitely a front runner.
Absolutely, yeah. And of course, it makes the whole situation quite interesting. And the continents continue to watch the evolvement around the African Union. And if these, changes from to East Africa will actually bring some sort of changes, practical changes at the level of, continent project. Dr. Elijah ENOAKU just rejoined. Welcome, sir. And we again apologize for the interruption. We are looking at the feasibility of practical change coming to the African Union through the election of the new African Union Commission chair, and what impetus can these candidates, if elected, bring to the AUC and the AU as a whole in a moment of high multilateralism across the African continent. Professor MONDA just highlighted the peculiarity of the Kenyan candidate. Now, there seems to be some sort of debate already across the African continent, given the place of Djibouti and Kenya. It's noted that Mohammed Ali Yusuf is one of the contenders who is hailing from Djibouti, and Kenyan Raila Odinga, which is actually, bringing some sort of disparity and contestation regarding the position of East African bloc in, rallying behind a candidate. Dr. ENOAKU.
Clarissa, sorry for that disconnection, but I was trying to make a point before I went offline that if this is what African has to offer, then we are in for trouble. I don't have any problem with Kenya holding the African Union chairperson. I don't have any problem with English countries holding the presidency of this African Union. But is that all Africa has to offer? Is it really Raila Odinga the only candidate that Kenya can offer? Aren't they energetic, forward-looking candidates with bright future who have the ideas to carry Africa forward? Is that the only person in Kenya that can represent Africa? To be honest with you, people like Raila Odinga, they are tired politicians, completely tired. They have no vision for Africa. I do not understand how a brilliant man like William Ruto, that I admire so well, will put a candidature like that one. I don't know if it's to pacify the opponents or the people on the other side, or is that what Kenya can afford at this time? Is that who Kenya can offer at this time? Even the whole of East African group, if you take people like Ari Kane, who is so forward-looking, who can stand toe-to-toe with the West, who can bring ideas when it comes to technology, security, education, food and nutrition, whatever it is that you call it. This woman has what it takes. People who have interacted even with the Western world, people who have been at the level of diplomacy, people who know what it takes to stand toe-to-toe with the Western world. Is that what Africa can afford at this time? What is the vision of Raila Odinga for Africa? What has he been able to do for Kenya that we can say, if we put him at the helm of African Union, he can replicate? What has Raila Odinga done? So, ladies and gentlemen, let us not chase after personalities here. or use political pacification as a tool to go to the African Union chairperson. It is wrong. Let's look at the young people. Julius Malema is from South Africa. We've seen what he went to the African Parliamentary Group. We see what he did within a short while. He shook the organization. He shook to the core. He brought changes. He forced his way, and we saw how things are changing. Those are the kind of leaders we should be looking for, not looking for politicians to go and sit there like Fakima was there. What did Fakima do? At his term of office, one of the things that African Union is supposed to do right now is to sit down and do an evaluation and say, okay, during the time of Fakima, or during this period from this time to time, this is what we did. This is where we failed. This is what we need to do to revamp our failures. But if the African Union follow the same pattern, the same channel, the same thing they've been doing over the years, that is not a forward-looking strategy. You need to reevaluate where you failed. Look at the Agenda 2063. Just look at the pillars. Gigantic, from economy. One of the pillars there is talking about sending somebody to the moon, a satellite. That Africa should launch a satellite by 2063. Is it Rauli Odinga who's going to have that idea to carry Africa forward, to carry out such an initiative? Is that the person that's going to take us forward to that direction? Look at the issue of energy independence in Africa. Is it Rauli Odinga who is going to channel that aspect of Africa? Look at the aspect of technology. Is it Rauli Odinga in this dispensation who is going to carry Africa forward in terms of technology? Come on, ladies and gentlemen. If we are not serious in Africa, we just fold the office and call it something else, because this is not the way Africa should go. We need people with ideas, forward-looking people who can come in and shake the ground and shake the status quo. Not people who are going to continue to maintain the status quo. The status quo is not working. That's the point I'm trying to say. So whether it is Djibouti or it is Kenya, to me, it doesn't really matter that much, though. It doesn't really matter. We need somebody in there who can shake things up in this dispensation. In a couple of days on your show, we're talking about the polarism that is coming to the world. The world is no more a unipolar world. Russia is coming. All these other countries are coming in. Who is the statistician, the technocrat, that is going to take advantage of these opportunities that are opening up in the world to go toe-to-toe and say, we have this opportunity. Let's sit down and discuss as equal. Or we're going to have a bunch of 55 member states was from one country to the other, like my colleague from Algeria was saying, like students. They're moving from one country to the other, moving around. No strategy. So the point I'm trying to make clear is I don't really care if it is Djibouti, or it is Kenya, or it is Zimbabwe, or it is South African. To me, we need somebody who is a technocrat, who understand what it means to bring 55 member states. Now, a couple of days ago on your show, we're talking about the African free trade agreement.
Sure.
You are talking about a 3.3 trillion economy that Africa has. And with that, when the African free trade agreement was announced, we saw a lot of movement from the Western world. We saw the European Union was trying to say, what does it mean for us? We saw a lot of organizations trying to position themselves. Is it Rauli Odinga that's going to take us on that path, ladies and gentlemen? Is it Rauli Odinga? Come on, let's be serious here. We need a technocrat. I don't care if it's Kenyan. I don't care if it's Zimbabwe. I don't care if it's South African. I don't care if it's who. We don't need somebody who is supposed to fit into the shoes, who is going there to fit into the shoes of Fakima, because he did nothing, completely nothing. It's a failed regime. We need to go away from those kind of politicizing the chairperson of the African Union. We need technocrats, people who can go there and shake the ground running. That is the approach we need to take, Clarice.
Okay, thank you so much.
Clarice, can I make a comment on that one, please?
Of course, Professor Monda, you can.
So two things to that, I think, as Donald Rumsfeld once said, you go to war with an army you have. You go to war with the army you have, not the one you wish for. So as much as we have these aspirations of having a technocrat to lead the AU, we have a dysfunctional African Union right now. We have to deal with what we have. We have a bicycle. A bicycle cannot become a Mercedes-Benz overnight. So this is a reality. Of course, we all aspire to have a visionary, a technocrat, but that technocrat really needs to have the networking and the personal relationships to push these reforms through. And whether you like Raila Odinga or not, or if it was any other candidate from Djibouti, Mohamed Yusuf, you know, a lot of African relationships, a lot of these diplomatic relationships are not necessarily formed through legal paperwork or resolutions. They're really established through personal relationships, that a candidate knows Dennis Sassou Nguesso, a candidate knows Samia Suluhu, a candidate knows Ouattara, you know, and you can criticize that as much as you like, but this is the reality of what we have. This is the AU we have, and we have to deal with that. So I think that's an important element to emphasize, right? We have to be realistic about what we have and match that with our aspirations. You can't aspire to propel yourself to the sun when you don't have the rocket that can even take you to the moon. You have to be realistic about where you want to go. I think that's the first point. I think my second point is this, that even if you decide that you know, the candidate is Raila Odinga, there's a lot of reasons why Raila was nominated by Kenya, and I think one of the big elements of that is the domestic politics. So President Ruto knows that Raila Odinga will be his biggest challenge for the next election in 2027. So a way of eliminating that threat or that domestic challenge to President Ruto's election is to have Raila Odinga as the chair of the Africa Union Commission. That way, the opposition will have a much weaker pool of candidates that can challenge President Ruto come the next election. So his nomination to the AU post is a question of continental diplomacy. But I'm also adding that there's a lot of local politics in Kenya that plays into that. That the fact that the government would rather have Raila in Addis Ababa tied up in diplomatic, niceties and diplomatic red tape, and not able to speak on the politics of Kenya. And that will give President Ruto a much better chance of winning the next election. So I think those are the my two major points. That number one, the AU is dysfunctional, it's weak, and it emphasizes a lot on personal relationships between heads of state. Raila Odinga knows most of them. Number two element of that is this networking in and of itself is not necessarily bad. You cannot change a dysfunctional institution of heads of state who are very jealous about their individual sovereignties. You can't change that overnight. You can't have radical change. It needs to be measured. It needs to be done tactfully or intelligently, or it will go nowhere. And then the third element is this question of the local dynamics of Raila Odinga being nominated. There's a lot of domestic politics around that. Okay. That by the government having the main opposition leader in an AU position will weaken the opposition in Kenya and allow President Ruto to have a much better chance of winning in 2027. But again, that is also still to be seen, because right now, you know, domestically, he's having a lot of internal problems with taxation and corruption and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
Clarice, I just plead for two. I know I've not been here because of connection. Give me 2 minutes to respond to my colleague. It's very, very important. Okay. Let me say this.
Dr. Elijah?
My colleague from Kenya, I respectfully understand what you're saying. But with due respect, sir, Africa cannot be sacrificed on the altar of political internal pacification. That is one of the things that is pulling us down in Africa. Dr. Ruto cannot sacrifice Africa on the altar of political internal pacification, because exactly that's what I was alluding to, and you just confirmed it here. That William Ruto is standing in Rally Odinga because he wants to avoid opposition from within. That is sacrificing Africa on the altar of political pacification in Kenya. And we should say no and no to that. Kenya has much more brighter young men, brighter young women that can stand toe-to-toe in the Western world and bring Africa out of the doldrum. So I totally, respectfully disagree with that approach from William Ruto. Number two, you said Africa is dysfunctional and you have to go to war with the tools that you have. Sir, I disagree completely, respectfully so. Reason being that Africa has a lot of bright young people saying that that is what we have right now. You're simply trying to say that we don't have what it takes. We don't have the people that it takes. Take us out of the door. No. I'll give you an example. I mentioned the South African firebrand Julius Malema. When he came to the parliamentary group, he did not even have a leadership position within that group. But he saw the lukewarm attitude. He saw the bureaucracy. He saw the procedural issues that were happening there. He saw the anarchy that was happening within the African parliamentary group. That young man shook that organization to the core. As we speak now, the hegemony that France was having because of the large percentage of Francophone countries within that group has been dismantled because he already dismantled that. He pointed out outside there and France was able to back out. The Francophonie, for example, that was having a stronghold on that organization was weakened. That is what we are talking about. What about Dr. Arikane? That woman who was supposed to take over, he was being lampooned by all these oligarchs. He has been chased away, but that was someone who was carrying out the flag of African Union in the Western world here. So I disagree respectfully with you, sir, that Africa does not have the people that it takes. And on the third point, yes, we need someone that has relationship that can be a relationship. But the kind of relationship we are talking about, you're talking about oligarchs, you're talking about sit-tight president, you're talking about people who will rather negotiate with the membership or the leadership of the African Union and continue to say sit tight or stay sit tight on their presidency. I do not want to relinquish power. But if you bring a young man there, for example, I want to tell you something that happens in the preamble of the African Union.
Please.
When they were discussing this issue of, African Union should have a stand on these presidents that do not want to give up power, they want to be there forever. Do you know what happened? What happened is that the presidents of these countries that were sitting tight, that do not want to give power, they went into some sort of a negotiation with the chairperson or the leadership of African Union that says that if you change the constitution within 6 months to your election, the African Union should condemn it. But if you change the constitution 1 year before an election, the African Union should not condemn it. They gave a loophole to these guys, and that's why the African Union is so quiet. People are changing constitution. They want to remain there forever. Nothing is happening. And you're telling me that this is a kind of a relationship that the chairperson of the African Union should be building with sit-tight president. Sir, I respectfully disagree with that. So I think I still maintain my point. We need radical change. We need somebody who can come there, shape the organization, change things, and let things go in the right direction. That is my approach to this.
It's about having a new and intentional African Union. Professor LAEED, we want to look at this, the framework of the African Union and how the bureaucracy and, of course, how things are being done. We quite notice that, according to the dictates of the African Union Commission, the chair must be a male, and then the assistant or the deputy, a female leader. Let's try to address the gender factor in the choosing the candidate of the African Union, and also if it is imperative to not look at the political maneuver, but rather put an African agenda at the fore before deciding who takes the helm of the African Union Commission.
Yes, you are right, Hilaris. I think just missing one element regarding this issue of Raila Odinga, whether we go for a radical change or just reform. Let's go in between. I mean, we cannot make a revolution anymore. I think what we should do, just revisit African Union values and principles. In other words, by electing a strong charisma person with enough experience, as a matter of fact, Raila Odinga is 79 years old. It's almost 80. So I think he has enough wisdom, enough common sense, enough experience to understand and to drive African Union to the best. And sure, having said that, I think what we should do right now, we should just rely on ourselves. As I said earlier and earlier, African continent is rich of its potential, human potential, as well as natural resources. Why don't we just negotiate and implement what have we been decided, whether it comes to, of course, Continental Free Trade Association or any other regional agreement. I think what we need, African, is someone who will come here to unite them and to get some kind of some collective discussion and talk to each other and reconsider the continent as for the interest of the 55 countries and for 1.4 billion inhabitants. So now the issue of leadership is there. And I'm not anticipating on who will be. As we said already, there are 4 contenders. Whether I would say on a rational or on logical terms, Kenya is supposed to be elected because of its political and economic and financial weight in Eastern countries, in Eastern Africa, I would say. So, having said that, the vote will be there. And I don't like to speak in terms of Francophone, Anglophone, or from Portuguese. No, this should be outside the discussion, because what is urgent for Africa now is how to unite, how to speak on one voice in the world affairs, how to regain, how to reconquer its dignity, its political and economic independence. That's most important thing. I know the African countries are facing a lot of problems, regional and conflict and strife and so forth. But a strong leader in Addis Ababa will be a good an extra and added value. I don't have to forget that we have also the election of deputy, and to my knowledge there are 3 ladies. That's maybe it makes good at least to get gender equality between women and man. I think we have one from Egypt, another from Algeria, and the third from Morocco. So again, here we want to have a lady who will playing I would say who will be there to stabilize or to help the chairman, to provide him the wisdom, to provide him the common sense, to provide him the diplomatic impetus, the kindness, gentleman manner. So I'm confident that the contribution of a woman, a lady within the African leadership will be an important asset. So, but overall, I think what we need, we should stop from asking for aid and for help from outside the continent. We should secure our own financial independence. This is the key issue. This is the key policy that the new chairman, the new incumbent in Addis Ababa in the leadership should look after. Then things will then he has just to revisit it, as I said, to revisit the African Union chart and principles, and we have not to be biased towards this region or towards this language or towards these people, but towards uniting Africa as a whole.
to face the adversities which are being embedded in along geopolitical lines. Let me come back to you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. When we listen to the points which have been advocated so far by you and your colleagues, we come to a seeming conclusion that the more internal strife Africa has, the more it feels at the international level. So now, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, I would love that you address critically on how Africa can solve some of these internal strife to be able to capitalize its position or maybe cement its position at the global level in the times of shifting alliances.
Okay, Clarice, before I answer your question, let me just go a little bit to the question you asked my colleagues in Algeria, if I remember very well. You see, some of these archaic rules in the African Union is a kind of a male chauvinistic rule that want to prevent women that can actually lead Africa. That was the case with Arikana Chambura K. When these people saw that this woman was coming to bring change, she was exposing a lot of things that were happening in the African Union, they gang up against her and said this and said all kinds of things. But we know what was happening in the African Union at that time. So that is the problem with these guys. Anybody within the African Union that seems to be, progressive in their ideas, that does not want to follow the status quo, that challenges the conservative, male chauvinistic attitude within the African Union, you're going to be fought against, and they will do all kinds of things to damage your candidates. And like I said, coming back to your point, the internal strife within Africa, it's so terrible in such a way that African countries spend so much of their time trying to resolve those crises. Look at the problem we are talking about, Kenya. PLO Lumumba is a Kenyan. If you look at the radical ideas of that Professor Lumumba, if you look at what he's put forward as a way of changing the African Union, if you look at his proposal, if you look at his ideas, there are radical changes that will propel Africa in a different direction. But William Ruto will leave him aside and go and pick an old-tired politician and say he wants to present him as the chairperson of the African Union. Now, back to your question. See, the reason Africa is so stratified and they cannot speak with one voice is not just the internal strife that happens within the African Union. Because we saw that on display when the Ukraine-Russia war started. We saw one country was taking a different position, another country was taking a different position. Kenya was supporting Ukraine and the United States. Some other countries were supporting Russia and so on. They were not able to speak in one voice. It wasn't because of any internal strife. It's because these countries have already formed a lot of alliances and dependencies with some of these Western countries in such a way that it is difficult for them to step on their toes or go against some of their policies. So they just have to toe the line. If you look at Kenyan alliances with the United States, they are deep-rooted. If you look at the Francophone countries with France, they are deep-rooted. If you look at some of these countries, that's why even Russia coming to Africa, Russia is struggling because Russia is trying to have a footstool on Africa. But they are going through, these coup d'etats, these countries that are having coup d'etats in order to implant themselves in Africa. Because it is very difficult for African countries to shake the status quo. So it is not much about the internal strife. It is because these dependencies have been formed for a very long time. And for them to disentangle themselves from those dependencies, they are either afraid to pay the price. But let me tell you something. When it comes to diplomacy, we know in diplomacy that there are no permanent enemy or permanent friends, but only permanent interests. But African countries are leaving those interests and hanging on permanent friends or permanent enemies. That's the trouble we have in Africa. The diplomacy in Africa is suffering because we do not put forth a strategic, coherent strategy that all the 55 country member states are going to adhere to. And this is what I have proposed in our center over the years. A lot of my friends that have written research papers on this, that published. If you go online, you see strategies for Africa to come out of its doldrums in this dispensation. Number one, the African Union is supposed to have a charter that every African countries have to sign onto. And that charter is going to require you that you're going to lose some autonomy. You're going to lose some autonomy. You're not losing the sovereignty of your country and saying that these 55 countries are going to go into some sort of a fusion and they form one gigantic United States of Africa. No, that's not what we've advocated over the year. We've advocated for some sort of a conglomerate of African states where you are going to lose some autonomy. If you're going to have, for example, a free trade agreement, all those checks and customs union, tariffs, that bilateral agreement that countries are having with one another, Western world, they are going to relinquish some of that in favor of a unilateral one platform for Africa. Okay. Number two, they are going to sign into regulating their economy that, for example, talk about corruption in Africa. A lot of countries in Africa are not able to sign on to anti-corruption drive that a lot of countries are doing because even the people that are supposed to sign onto that, they are going to be caught in the same dragnet. So you see, the problem is not the internal struggles in Africa, which we know that they are there. We cannot, just refuse that. Those internal struggles are there. But the problem we find in Africa is that Africa is so dependent on foreign structures that they do not have independent structures that guide their strategy going forward. Once they come to that point where we can do our own thing and then we deal with the rest of the Western world as an independent African platform, I'm telling you, Africa will stand toe-to-toe with the European Union. Africa will stand toe-to-toe with NAFTA. Africa will stand toe-to-toe even with NATO, I'm telling you, because some of these countries, what do they have? We had a conference, we're discussing with colleagues who said, the 55 members of Africa, let's say we'll talk about monetary policy, for example. Those 55 members coming out with a unitary monetary policy will be...
Unfortunately, we lost...
backed up with the dollars and so on. They take African gold in order to back up their currencies.
Sure.
Go ahead, Clarice.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU. Just to note that the stakes are actually high for Africa and for the African Union. Is it time for that total reforms to be, put into place? Or coming now to you, Professor MONDA. When we listen to every aspect, we discover that, we need the willpower, like the president of Uganda, Yoweri Museveni, said some time ago, that we need to advocate African solutions to African problems. Let's come now to see the practicality of bringing a new phase in the African Union come 2025 with the election of the new chair.
Yeah, I think there's a practicality of having a new chair. There will be a new chair, but I still emphasize what I had said before. This chair needs to be able to work within the contending or the prevailing paradigms within the Africa Union, right? So you can't become the chair, Clarice, of Africa Union Commission and start fighting with all the heads of state, demanding that they leave power because they've been there too long, demanding that they reform, demanding that, you have one Africa fiscal policy. You'll yell and bark, but you'll be like, an old record. Nobody will listen to you because the reality of the continent is we have 55 sovereign states, and these leaders are not willing to give up their sovereignty.
Sure.
If you're going to talk about a radical position, what AU chair will go and stand and tell Paul Biya that he needs to leave power, or Yoweri Museveni, or anybody else? So I think we really need to match our aspirations with the reality on the ground.
Sure.
And I think we also need, as much as you might not agree with a leader from a particular region or country, we need to respect the sovereignties of these leaders, even if we think they are failing or they're corrupt, because they have legitimacy, right? Whether they acquired it wrongly or rightly, they have the legitimacy by virtue of them being in office. So am I saying they're right or they have all the right visions? No, but I'm also saying we need to be realistic about what we are aspiring to and the tools that we have to get to where we want to go. And in saying that, I also must add that this is going to be very critical in any kind of reform you have with the African Union. You have to have the heads of state on board. And maybe you can start with maybe start with baby steps, what I would call baby steps. So rather than demanding that African countries, all 55 countries, do away with their currencies and have their economies tied to to one regulatory federal body, which again would be very problematic because who would lead that? How would you fund it? How would you get all these 55 different parliaments to ratify that?
Yeah.
I think a smarter strategy will be, why don't we focus on those areas where all 55 countries can agree across the board, the low-hanging fruit. And I think questions like climate change, I think questions like the decarbonization of the global economy, where Africa has a major stake in terms of its vast natural resources and the capacity for Africa to support the global economy in decarbonization. I think no African country will object to that, right? Because it's low-hanging fruit and it's an area where you can get broad consensus.
Okay.
But if you're going to attack each one of these 55 presidents and say, oh, you've been in power for over 40 years, you need to leave tomorrow, oh, every African country, you need to drop your currency and, you need to come on to one African currency tomorrow, I think that's really a recipe for crisis and for dysfunction. And I think it's just not going to work. I think a more practical way, a smarter way to approach it is find areas of consensus across all 55 states. Climate change, decarbonization is one big factor. Another one would be fairer, more equitable systems for international and global trade, more transparent systems. So for example, ratings agencies like Standard & Poor's, like Moody's, that rank many African countries as high risk. So that when Africa goes to borrow from the World Bank, we're borrowing at unreasonable, unrealistic, high interest rates. That's something you can get consensus from all 55 African leaders and you can have one agenda. But assuming that you're going to dictate to them, assuming that you can even have that power, I think, to dictate that they have to leave power because they've been there too long, they don't have a vision, and we all need to have one currency. I think we need to be realistic about how we want to interact with these 55 leaders on the continent.
Okay, thank you so much, Professor. We still have about 4 minutes to be together. I think I'll come to you, Professor LAEED, with concluding phase, of course, of this program. The final thoughts on the future of the African Union Commission and the African Union and its leadership's potential in impacting Africa's integrated development. 2 minutes, please.
Thank you, Clarissa, once again. I think we don't have to get into some kind of no unfinished shift. The only thing we should do for the new leader, as I said to you already, we have to stick to the path of the African Union. I don't think we are there to get some kind of wiping out the power of national countries. No, what is continental is about African Union responsibility, and what is relevant to bilateral is for countries. So what we want, and I agree with our friend David, when he speaks about let's strengthen what is common in between us. That's exactly what we should do. Let's strengthen what we share together, what we have in common. And of course, what is in common is more important than what is not in common. And that's why we have to think not to be chauvinistic or egoistic or individualistic. We have to think in terms of continental countries. We have the example of European Union. They always share. They discuss. They have heated debate. But respect is there. Ultimate goal is how to secure the interest of Europe. So we are here to secure the interest of Africa and to how to prepare African Union for the next generation, for the next decade, as really a continent that will have an impact on international affairs. We want African with 1.3 billion people. We don't. How on earth do we accept this fate? Why don't we have this system? We're part of the United Nations security system. Our own permanent seat. This is exactly what we should. Please get our confidence, get our independence. Feel proud and sovereign of our deed. That's our former leader in 1960s, what they have done. The responsibility is in our leader of today to secure a strong and respected African Union for the years to come.
Thank you so much. Inshallah, we are going to have a strong and integrated African Union to drive the African agenda. Let's culminate with you, Dr. Elijah ENOAKU, on, of course, the prospect and what scope can the leaders use to drive the Africa's real trajectory.
Clarice, let me say this, that the African Union that we want in this dispensation, if we want to hang on low-hanging fruits, the African Union is doomed to fail. Let me tell you that right from the onset. If the African Union is not the African Union that's ready to do big things, that African Union is ready to fail. If the African Union is the one that's going to leave the shadow and be chasing after Moody and say Moody is rating Africa too high, why is Moody rating Africa too high? Moody is rating Africa too high because Africa has shown over and over that they cannot pay their debts. How many countries in Africa have defaulted on their debts? How many countries have to go through the structural adjustment program because they were not able to pay their debts? You can't go ahead and be blaming Moody. Africa needs to put his house in order. And if we are going to put our house in order, we must look at those things that are biting us and be ready to take the bull by the horns. If we are going to be chasing the Western world and going after climate change and going after Moody and leaving what is biting us in our houses, I'm afraid we're not ready for a big time that's coming forward. So Africa should go in bold. Africa should go in for a bold change. Think about the likes of Professor Lumumba, that's the son of the soil. Think about the light of Arid Kana, that's the daughter of the soil. Think about the likes of Julius Malema, that's the son of the soil. Not some tired old politician who has nothing left in their agenda carried to put as a chairperson of the African Union. We are going to fail if we continue in this direction. That is all I want to say.
Okay, yeah, thank you so much. Of course, I know that subsequently we are going to revisit this very important topic, the role of the African Union. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for the greater insight and into analyzing the stakes for the continent as far as the election of the next AUC chair is concerned. Just to end with this statement that came from former and late Mauritanian President Mokhtar Ould Dada, that was in 1963. He said, and I quote, "We are the focus of attention of the entire world, especially our African peoples. And the greatest crime we can commit against these people is to fail. In global geopolitics, of course, Africa now stands at a central stage of superpowers, and these nations in recent times have engaged fully in diplomatic relations with Africa. Then the scope is actually broad for the African continent to capitalize on. And it is on this note that we are going to draw the curtains into today's edition of the program Global Insight on For You Media Africa. But don't go away. Keep having a lovely moment in the company of our transmissions, and always have in mind of that it is another view of the world, of course, another view of Africa. Thank you so much.